I've been taken, my heart is racing 100 miles. Every second I'm with you, every second I'm with you. This is love, 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 love. The only thing I know is true. This is the love that I could fall into.
Okay, everyone, when you hear that music, at least in my mind, I can only be thinking of one thing, and really 6 words. Big Life, Big Stage, Big Ten. And that is exactly what we are going to be doing today on the next segment of the Zach Curl Sports Podcast. And that is a little bit of a breakdown of everything that is going on in what I think is right now, by far and away, the best college conference in all of college basketball, and that is the Big Ten. There are so many different teams throughout this league that I believe are making a big-time impact, and I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to take a full segment to just lock in on the Big Ten, and I totally understand. To start off today's show, I did speak about Wisconsin. I thought the way the Badgers have been playing over the last couple weeks, they deserve their own segment, their own recognition. But besides the Badgers, there are so many teams in this Big Ten that I wanted to talk about. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first game from the Big Ten on during the Christmas break that I wanted to talk about is Iowa at Minnesota. And if you listen to this show, you know I think Iowa is a very good basketball team. I think they're about a top 12 team, but I never bought the hype that they were in the same conversation as Gonzaga or Baylor or even Tennessee. And the real reason is just straight up, they don't play any defense. And there are going to be nights when a team like Iowa, who we all know what their strength is, we all saw how good they could be when they played North Carolina, when you saw Bohannon and Fredericks and Wieskamp and Garza and McCaffrey hitting shot after shot after shot. But I do think we all did know that eventually that wasn't going to continue. And it's one thing for Iowa to lose to Gonzaga. That was a tough game. We all know just how good and how talented of a basketball team the Gonzaga Bulldogs are. But Iowa having a lead at Minnesota and blowing that game late down the stretch really didn't shock me. Because number one, and we'll get to Minnesota in a bit, the Gophers are a really good basketball team, and that gym, Williams Arena, is a tough gym to play in, even with no fans. I feel like it's one of those gyms where even if you're not there, you just turn on the TV and see it, and you just say to yourself, like, what exactly is good with this gym here in Minnesota? But Minnesota beats Iowa, and this is a game where, to be honest, all of my concerns for the Hawkeyes and why they aren't an elite basketball team, all of those concerns really did come to fruition. They gave up 102 points in this game. That is not going to get the job done. 44.8% from the field for Minnesota. 17 made threes on 40% shooting from three for the Golden Gophers. And my guy, Brandon Johnson, 27 minutes, 26 points, 8 of 9 from 3, and those are the things that are going to happen if Iowa just continues not to play any defense. Luka Garza had 32 in this game, in 39 minutes played, and he had 17 rebounds. He is probably by far and away the National Player of the Year favorite and one of the best players in college basketball. CJ Frederick had 23. Wieskamp played well with 14, and still, with all that being said, Iowa was just not able to get the job done. And I'm not panicking because I totally understand. When you play in a league as good as the Big Ten, it is hard to win basketball games. I don't think anyone could have expected Iowa to just run through the Big Ten like a hot knife through butter. But at the same time, their next 3 games, home against Northwestern, who we'll also get to in a bit, they're playing really good basketball right now. At Rutgers, we know the Scarlet Knights don't lose at home. At Maryland, and then home to Minnesota, home to Michigan State, as we get into the midway portion of January. Iowa is a good team. I think they're a top 12 team, but I never took them seriously as a legitimate national championship contender because they don't play defense. As for Minnesota, I'll give the Gophers credit. They were a team that before the season started, I picked to finish 10th in the Big Ten, and when people see that I predicted them 10th in the Big Ten, they must think, oh, Zach, you weren't high on this Gopher team at all, and that is bad news for Richard Pitino if he wants to keep his job. But to be honest with you, I just had Minnesota 10 because they are in such a good league like the Big Ten. They do whatever they can to win games, and to be honest, against Iowa, there were many different portions throughout that game where I said, okay, the Gophers are done. They have no shot. But somehow, some way, they stuck together and found a way to win. We saw what they were able to do a couple weeks ago against St. Louis, beating the Billikens, who are a really good basketball team, at home by 8. They have a win over Boston College, which is really good. And we'll see what they do tonight at home against Michigan State in a battle of 2 ranked teams. That should be a phenomenal game, and I'm going to be curious to see how exactly Michigan State comes out in that one. Speaking of Michigan State, let's get into them for a little bit. I watched them up close and personal against Wisconsin. We obviously spoke a little bit earlier in the show about the Badgers and the type of basketball they're playing, but I got to be honest with you, I'm a little concerned about Michigan State. I watched them play Duke, and it was a very nice win going on the road for them to Cameron and getting the job done in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, but I remember saying to myself, my main takeaway coming out of that game wasn't necessarily how well Michigan State played, it was how bad Duke played. And Michigan State hasn't really given me that performance yet this season where they've convinced me, okay, this is a no-doubt top 10 team in college basketball like a lot of people think they are. I love Rocket Watts. I love his game. I think he's phenomenal. But I'm not necessarily sure if him playing on the ball as their lead handler at point guard is the best recipe for Michigan State to win. I think Rocket Watts is at his best when he's playing off the ball and he could just go get his. Josh Langford is obviously recovering. This is the first time he's playing in a college basketball game in about a year and a half. Aaron Henry, I've never been a huge fan of his. I think he's a solid player, but I've never been convinced that he could be the best player on a really good team. Michigan State's big men are a little bit of a problem as well. As much as I love Joey Hauser, I don't think that you're going to be able to win many basketball games, especially I don't think you're going to be able to succeed on the defensive side of the ball if you're playing him at the 5. And I understand he dropped 27 against Wisco. He is one of their most consistent offensive players, but at the same time, you need size and you need defense and you need rebounding if you want to win in a league like the Big Ten. So I'm going to be curious to see if a guy like Sissoko, a guy like Marble, a guy even like Malik Hall could make a little bit more of an impact. I will be very fascinated to see how a guy like Liam Robbins for the Minnesota Golden Gophers is able to maybe expose Michigan State in that aspect tonight. So that's my take on Michigan State. Another team I wanted to get to, which very quietly I'm kind of disappointed in, that's the Indiana Hoosiers. And we'll get to Northwestern in a little bit and just how great a basketball that they've been playing over the last couple weeks. But I got to be honest with you, Indiana has to be better. And I've been a guy that going into the season was an Archie Miller defender. When I saw that there are many Indiana fans that aren't necessarily the biggest believer in him, I didn't necessarily agree with that just because his first couple years at Indiana, he obviously had the rebuilding year in year 1. Romeo Langford, that didn't work out in year 2. He was just such a ball hog. I didn't necessarily think that team not succeeding was Archie's fault. I don't think Romeo was just ready for that big moment. And then last year, I think if the tournament would have happened, Indiana would have gotten in and they would have deserved credit. And then to start off this year in Asheville in the Maui Invitational, they beat Providence, fine, good win. Lose to Texas, no big deal. We all know Texas is a really good basketball team. And then they beat Stanford in a really impressive 16-point win. They then lose to Florida State on the road in a close overtime loss, which is fine, no big deal. They beat Butler, good. But the last 2 games have been a little disappointing. They lose to Northwestern at home. And I understand Northwestern is a ranked team. They're playing really good basketball. I think it is all safe to assume that they are much better than we expected. But still, if you're Indiana, at home against Northwestern, that's the game you got to win. On the road against Illinois, they had their chances. They were in the game throughout until the Illini took a big jump and ended up not even relinquishing the lead on Saturday. They ended up winning by a final score of 69-60. But I think Illinois, that game, especially coming off a loss against Northwestern, that could have been a game they won. And then their next 3 games, home Penn State, home Maryland, at Wisconsin. I'll say this. Wednesday night against Penn State, that is a massive game for Indiana because I think we could all agree Penn State is a team that in this Big Ten, they play tough, they play hard. Miles Dredd could really score. Seth Lundy's a good player, but Indiana has to win that game at home against Penn State. They need to regain some momentum. They have to win at home against Maryland, who right now just flat out doesn't look like a very good basketball team because going to Wisconsin on the road and winning is hard. And the Hoosiers, this is a season, I believe, even in a very tough Big Ten, where they have to make the NCAA tournament. And if they don't, and fans want to start getting on Archie Miller a little bit, I'll totally understand why. I still think behind Trace Jackson-Davis and the improvement of Armon Franklin, this Hoosier team could still be solid, but they have to be really, really careful going forward. I'll mention Illinois for a brief bit. I'm not too concerned about the Illini. I understand they've taken a couple losses over the last couple weeks, but hey, they had a really nice week. Going on the road to Penn State and winning is never an easy thing to do, and beating Indiana in a tough, hard-nosed game was not easy for the Illini as well. I think it's going to take them a little more time to really get the chemistry going. There are some new players to go along with some stars from last year. Curbelo and Miller are two players that I think could both be really good really soon for the Illini. It's just going to take some time. So I'm buying my Illinois stock right now. I totally understand that people may be a little bit down on them when they look at the loss they had against Missouri and the loss that they had against Baylor and the loss they had against Rutgers. But I still believe in Illinois. I still think they are a top 10 basketball team, even though they did take a couple losses. But the win against Indiana was a good one. I didn't necessarily think they were the better team throughout that game, but still they found a way to win. Another game I wanted to talk about from the Big Ten earlier this week was Rutgers and Ohio State. And I got to be honest with you guys. I think both of these teams are top 20 good. If you missed the game, Rutgers goes to Ohio State, and in the first half, Rutgers literally could not miss. If you remember, Rutgers is a team that was coming off a really nice win against Illinois, and if they would have beaten Ohio State on the road, I think that could have been a game where Rutgers really could have established themselves as not only one of the top teams in the Big Ten, but yeah, I'll say it, the best team in the Big Ten. And I understand we spoke a lot about Wisconsin, but Rutgers is a really good basketball team, and in the first half against Ohio State, they were playing great. They couldn't miss a shot, but then unfortunately, a couple things just didn't go their way. Jacob Young, who's balling out in the game, probably the best college game I've ever seen him play, he gets hurt out for the game. Their top big man, Miles Johnson, was not helped by the referees. He gets into foul trouble, which ultimately cost Rutgers. Their other big man, Cliff Omoruyi, he didn't play as well. And Ohio State was able to do what all good teams do. They were able to take advantage of Rutgers' mistakes and go on a run and end up getting the dub. E.J. Liddell is one of the three most underrated players in college basketball. I think he could be a guy that ends up on the first team All-Big Ten squad. He has been phenomenal. I love his game. Ohio State, in their two losses this season, one of them came against Purdue where he didn't even play, and he is just such a difference maker for that Buckeye team. That is a player I'm buying stock in right now. CJ Walker and Dwayne Washington, good veteran guards. I also like the way Justice Suing has been playing. They have another freshman big man, Zed Key, that has given them some good minutes. I'm buying stock in Ohio State. I was impressed with the way they were able to come back against Rutgers, and to be honest, I think Rutgers will be fine. I still think they're a top 15 team. Just the breaks didn't go their way against Ohio State. In order to make a deep tournament run, they're just going to have to get a little more healthier. Geo Baker came back against Maryland a couple weeks ago. He looks healthy, which is a great sign. How about this? Ron Harper Jr., that's another guy. He's an All-Big Ten player. He is phenomenal. That is a guy who I just love his game, and I think he could be a pro, and he really established himself as a legitimate go-to scorer for Rutgers throughout the first couple games of the season. He's a great, great player, fun player to watch. So I think Rutgers and Ohio State, my main takeaway from that game was that both teams are really good. And then the last team I wanted to talk about in the Big Ten is Northwestern. The Wildcats have been one of the biggest surprises in college basketball to start this season. And I remember a couple weeks ago, right after Northwestern played Pitt in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, I went off on a Chris Collins rant. I said, dude, last year, your team literally was so close to winning a bunch of games, but they just couldn't finish down the stretch. And that's exactly what they did in their game against Pitt. They were significantly the better team. They were winning throughout the game, and they choked the game away late the same exact way that they blew so many different games last year. But over the last couple weeks, they get the win over Michigan State. They get the win over Indiana on the road. And my guy, Bo Bowie, the same guy that, to be honest, cost Northwestern in that game against Pitt by missing two big free throws down the stretch, he's able to hit the game-winning shot against the Ohio State Buckeyes, and somehow, some way, Northwestern is undefeated in the Big Ten, and they are ranked in the top 25. Miller Kopp is a baller. I absolutely love that kid's game. Obviously, same with Bo Bowie, Ryan Young, Robbie Barron. This Northwestern team could play, and Coach Collins deserves a lot of credit for getting his locker room to stick with the process, getting the rest of his players to buy into the process even after some tough years. And Northwestern is a great story. I said going into the season, if things didn't improve, Chris Collins should be on the hot seat. He's doing a great job of securing his job right now. The Big Ten, by far and away, is the best conference in college basketball. I'm not even sure if there are any bad teams in this league. I understand I haven't spoken about Michigan yet on this podcast, mainly because they haven't played anyone. I understand they haven't lost a game yet, but I just think that schedule needs to be a little better. Purdue is a team I'm going to keep my eye on as well. They're a team that I think is pretty good. I think they're a tournament team. The way they played against Maryland was impressive. They were able to find a way to win. So the Big Ten, just night in and night out, just know it will be a battle.